Welcome back to the Glassix Spotlight, where today we're diving into the transformative world of emotional intelligence with Sandra Thompson, a pioneer in integrating EI into customer and employee experiences. Sandra not only the first Goleman emotional intelligence coach in the UK, but also a seasoned TEDx speaker and the founder of EI Evolution, a consultancy dedicated to enhancing customer and employee engagement through emotional intelligence. With her extensive background, Sandra has been at the forefront of applying EI principles to create more compassionate and effective business environments. Her approach involves deep expertise in neuroscience, psychology, and behavioral science, which she leverages to forge stronger emotional connection that lead to memorable and positive experiences. Whether it's through her engaging workshops, keynote speeches, or innovative courses, Sandra's work has consistently demonstrated that emotional intelligence is a critical skill that can revolutionize businesses, practices, and interpersonal dynamics alike. Sandra, it's a pleasure to have you join us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm thinking to myself, that sounds quite good.
Well, well deserved. Um, Before we dive into the day discussion, is there anything exciting or a recent accolade you think worth sharing with our listeners?
Do you know, thank you for that question. I've been doing some work on my own podcast, which is actually called the Emotional Intelligence Podcast, because it involves humans and their dogs and investigating and exploring empathy and emotional intelligence through the relationship that the dog has with the human and also some of the behaviors we see from the human in response to the dog. So I'm hugely excited by the guests we've had, both four legs and two so far. And I just want to also thank all of you who were listening, who might have also been listening to this podcast too. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I have to say I had the chance to listen to the recent episode. And first of all, the concept it's just brilliant. I think it's called Stephen Pepper. That was
Yeah, that's
the
right.
last episode. It broadcasted about 5 days ago, if I'm not mistaken.
That's it. Yeah, yeah.
And I think that the entire concept is just different from anything else. So if you love listen to CX podcasts, if you are looking to enhance emotional intelligence at the workspace, I highly recommend checking out the Emotional Intelligent Podcast. It's PAWDCAST podcast.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
yeah, for anyone's looking. For our listeners, today's episode called "Harnessing EI (Emotional Intelligence) for Superior Customer and Employee Experiences" with Sandra Thompson. And Sandra, I want to jump right in. Um, as the first Goldman emotional intelligence coach in the UK, what a title, by the way. How do you integrate this principle into your work with businesses to transform their customer and employee experiences?
It's a great question to kick off, and we're going to get into the core of it really. When we think of projects to improve customer experience, when we think about initiatives and programs to improve employee experience, we often think very rationally about the work that we're doing. We have this plan, and then people will do this, and then they'll do that. And when I talk to people about the brain, now I'm not a psychologist, but I've got lots of psychologist friends, and also I'm not a neuroscientist, but I have been a student of it for some time. And when I invite people to think about the brain, the things that the brain does, the influence the brain has on our emotion and our behavior, it starts to invite them to think about what they're doing in quite a different way. Because we've all had situations, haven't we, where people will say one thing and do another. And if you magnify that by things that organizations do and say, and then they might not get the results they want, we've really got to think about what it means to be human. And it's those kind of conversations, those kind of keynote speeches, the kind of things, the exercises that I do in workshops where people suddenly have some kind of light bulb moment where they think, Oh, that's why. And so it means often people will have to reconsider the approach that they're taking, reconsider some of the levels of engagement, the way in which they're engaging people, because these messy, beautiful, irrational brains that we're all walking around with, if we start to understand those, it's a completely different approach.
Yeah, love that. By the way, rumor has it that you're about to release a new course. Is there anything you know you want to share with us today?
There's a couple of things actually. So the first thing, thank you, is I'm about to release. In fact, we might not have released it entirely by the time this podcast goes out, but look out, folk, for something called Shine Bright. It's a book, but it's more than a book. Well, this is all very intriguing, isn't it? But it's inviting people as individuals to go on their own emotional intelligence and empathy journey. So look out for something called Shine Bright. It will be accompanied by an online course, which will come in the new year. But this is really what I'm after. I'm after helping people, helping them to understand that it's never too late to develop the skill of emotional intelligence. You know, when I was training to become a coach, there were people who were in their late 80s also investing their time in this phenomenal thing, which is emotional intelligence and empathy. So, yeah, a book and a course coming soon to a great bookshop near you.
Yeah. By the way, EI is just huge. I remember I was reading an article about a year ago, even more than that, talking about developing EI within children's and the
Mm,
importance of developing EI within children's and how it contributes to developing other characteristics, the likes of grit
yeah,
and it just it's an enormous subject,
yeah,
but unfortunately we're only going to touch a small aspect of it today.
yeah. No, that's right. And I think when I've been teaching postgraduate applied customer experience and emotional intelligence, many of the people who take part in that course are parents, and many of them say, oh, "You should be teaching children this." And there's so much more work being done in the United States and in the UK to bring more empathy into the classroom. And this probably is a topic for another podcast, but certainly be confident, everyone, that there are little glimmers of hope that this will become part of education more formally going forward. We desperately need people to be able to communicate, to connect with one another. With the advancement of technology, it's becoming a bit more tricky. But yeah, it's a hugely exciting area, and I'm really supportive of those that do so much more in schools.
Yeah, I can easily think about 3 to 5 different subjects that can be easily replaced with EI for children's at school. Well, Sandra, can you share an example where EI significantly improved the business's customer service outcomes? Because a lot of our listeners are from the customer service world, customer experience. And I think, I wouldn't say it's $1 million question, but definitely a relevant one to the majority of our listeners today.
Yeah, sure. So actually, I'm going to talk about two things. So the first thing is one of the results of using emotional intelligence is to give the person you're speaking to something called significance. Now, how many times have we as customers spoken to an agent or spoken to a member of frontline staff and you're not getting anywhere because they're not listening properly, they're not hearing what you're really saying? And so, some work I did, actually started this work about 7 years ago, but I've been doing bits and pieces on this for a long time. And this is training people to listen. Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Because ultimately we do this day in, day out, but we don't often do it properly. So, when I talk about listening, I'm talking about what exactly is the person saying? what is the tone of the voice? What are they not saying? And if you have the luxury of being in the same physical space as that individual, what is all of their body language saying? And when we observe humans and we really start to understand what they're really trying to communicate, and we're receptive to all of the signals, then we get to a point where they feel they can trust you. They feel that you're really listening and they tell you a bit more to help you solve the problem. So, what I've done is I've worked with frontline staff, I've worked with team leaders, and I've worked with managers so that colleagues can feel more significant with each other. They feel a greater sense of reassurance, they feel supported, and also the conversations that frontline staff have with customers are so much better quality because the customer doesn't have to repeat themselves, because the agent or the frontline staff has said the right thing at the right time. Because of all the words the customer has said, there are two in there, for example, that are the most significant. And so you train people to ask great questions, to perhaps say, now, when you said this word, can you tell me a bit more about it? It's all of that type of skill. Really brilliant active listening is not only really healthy for the employee, it's also massive opportunity to emotionally connect with customers far faster. And while it might seem counterintuitive to spend more time listening and being more attentive, you get better results every time.
Totally. So if I need to break it down to like three digestible pieces, I'll say one, listen to understand, not to respond. So
Yeah,
active
that's
listening
right.
is definitely part of it. The second thing would be probably show interest, show that you care,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
also involves a lot of empathy.
Hmm.
Um, and the third, I think, might be more um, on the personal. It's like, how do you take the conversation and you literally develop a relationship?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. But I would like to just go back to one particular point you've made there, Ran, because empathy. What do we understand empathy to be? In the world of customer experience, very often we use a phrase, don't we, of we'll go and stand in our customer's shoes or we'll walk a mile in our customer's shoes. And I love being provocative on this topic. You're actually more empathetic when you practice empathy within emotional intelligence. And here's the thing. You've got someone who is aware of their own emotion and they understand exactly how they're feeling and they manage how they're feeling when they talk to someone else. And then you've got person B who doesn't know exactly how they're feeling, but they have got a bit of a guess. But they then talk to the other person and talk about the emotions they're feeling rather than talking about what the other person is feeling. We don't do a very good job on empathy, I'm afraid, without emotional intelligence. So I'm inviting your listeners right now, the next time they have a conversation with someone who requires empathy, just check in on yourself and make sure that when you say, tell me how you're feeling, it's far better than saying, oh, I imagine you're quite frustrated by that. Every single one of us feel different emotions differently. And it's quite limiting to put the emotion you're feeling onto the other person. Let them describe it and then play back exactly the words they've used. And I bet you get somewhere far faster than trying to predict what they might be talking about and how they might be feeling.
I love that. And I want to get even more into the core of this because, if people would understand the value they actually get from being more empathetic into practicing empathy within AI, I
Yeah.
think that would be a game changer because I don't think because we always say yes, you empathy is a big thing in the CX world, and now you're saying, which is a brilliant, you know, um, uh, thing to say, practice empathy within AI, but then I don't think that a lot of people, and sorry if I'm underestimating here, but I don't think a lot of people understand the actual power and the influence of practicing empathy will have
Yeah.
on them.
You're
Because
you're absolutely right. Sorry, I interrupt.
no, no, no. I think the world's become a better place. You become a better you. And sorry if I sounds cliche here, but it really is. When you go to study marketing at the uni, um, you learn emotional intelligence. This
Mm,
is part of marketing in a
yeah.
lot of senses, right? Um,
Yep.
but I mean, so marketers might understand the value, CX leaders and experts might understand the value, but then why does it not go further than that? You know what I mean?
I do. I think sometimes people are worried. They're a little bit concerned that they might overstep the mark. They feel that there's quite a lot of pressure on them to respond in certain ways, and it's natural, right? We don't want to make mistakes. We don't want to offend anyone ever. So we naturally default to this thing when in actual fact, if we're comfortable with how we're feeling and we recognize how we're feeling and we sit with that, we are so much better service of the other person because they feel properly heard. I mean, it really is quite extraordinary. To your point, Ran, you do come away a bit tired, to be honest. When you've been properly listening and focusing, you do feel more tired than if you've been playing platitudes or doing your best to be empathetic and conveying your own emotions, but you know that you've done the best thing in that tone, in that particular time, you've been the best you possibly can. And what happens then, and I know you know this, people will come to you again. People will say to you, do you know what? You're different. You really listen. You
And you
really
know,
listen.
and you know what the number one problem would be. It will easily become an energy drainer.
Well, that's why you've also got to look after yourself. The amazing thing about emotion intelligence, the model that I study, it's 12 competencies. Within those 12 competencies are things like positive outlook, which is all about resilience. So you are kind to yourself as well. And you make sure that you go off and you do whatever you need to do in your personality type to restore your batteries. You are absolutely right on that because as we know, you can't pour from an empty cup. You've got to look out for yourself. And when you have that emotional intelligence to know, do you know what, I'm really drained right now? When you have the emotional intelligence, you feel comfortable to say, I need to put the boundary up. If it's all right, can we speak later or perhaps tomorrow? And because you're such great quality as a listener, as a leader, as a team leader, you're doing the best to be of service to customers, people will let you do that.
Completely. Um, I want to touch on your TEDx talk. You highlighted the benefits of emotional intelligence. Could you expand on how these benefits manifest in a day to day business interactions?
Yeah,
If you like
sure.
had to choose like one very great example, or even more than that.
Yeah, sure. So, no, thank you for that. So, the TEDx was focusing on remote work, customer experience, and emotional intelligence. The hypothesis was basically when you let people work from home and they're doing these customer roles, it's possible that they can regulate their emotions more easily and they can be in a place of comfort and they will show up the best way they can. And I want to highlight one particular thing that has actually been one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of emotional intelligence is consistency. Now, emotional intelligence isn't about bottling up all of the things that you feel that are less positive so that one day you explode. Emotional intelligence is about regulating how you feel. Now, we've all been, and I'm sorry that you may have been in this situation, but I reckon all of us have been in a scenario where we're working with someone or our boss. One minute they're completely fine and friendly, and the next minute they're stressed and they're shouting and they're angry, and it's all like, what is going on? When you get those extremes of emotion in the workplace, it's quite disconcerting. It erodes trust. you don't know what type of person you're going to end up with. You don't know whether the proposal is going to be warmly received with lots of smiles and laughter, or there's going to be red pen all over your proposal with an angry response. No one needs that. And I'll be putting my hand up here and say, much earlier in my career, 20, 25, 30 years ago, I was like that. I was absolutely all over the place because I was so competitive. I was so demanding. I would be that person, and I recognize it in some of the personalities that I meet, but it doesn't get the best out of people. When you're able to sit calmly and say, when you did that thing, this is how I felt. I don't want to feel like that again. How can we work together to sort it out? You are being the best you can be because you're calmly describing an emotion that isn't what you want. The person calmly understands what's happened. You work together to a solution rather than walking around on eggshells. No one likes it. We don't need to do it.
No, not in 2024. Beyond that, absolutely very uncomfortable situation to be at. Unfortunately, myself, and I believe all of our listeners, without any exception, had to go through that at least once in their career. Um,
And
yeah,
and imagine that then as well though for customers. So you ring up or you go into a store and the person's is very friendly and very lovely, and the next minute they're quite sharp with you. They can be kind of sarcastic, they can be really flippant. That's really confusing for the customer. And I know as a customer, when I've been on the receiving end of that, I'm like, well, fine, bye. And I walk off because I just think you lot are not in check. I'm not asking you anything that's unreasonable. And there's this amazing thing called emotional contagion. I'm sure you've heard of it, where if someone's in a really bad mood or they're really angry, depending on the type of person you are, it sometimes rubs off. And so you end up being in this mood that you didn't ask for, but you've got the remains of it, and you've got to shake it off like a zebra or like a dog shaking, and then you can get back to where you were before.
so I'll tell you what I do in such situations. I just take a deep breath seriously, and I
Mhm.
don't judge the other person. I don't judge them. I don't know them. I don't know what they went through. I don't know who texted them right now. I don't know what thought they had through their mind.
Yeah,
So I tend not to judge and try to be
that's
as
good.
receptive as possible,
No,
because
that's good.
I just learned with time that the world is a better place and I'm a better me when I do
Mm.
that. So
And that what you're talking about there is overcoming something called the amygdala hijack. So the breath is such an incredible exercise because what it's doing is it's calming down the nervous system, and it's your body is saying, "Oh, actually, he's fine. It's all good. Don't worry about it. Move on." Whereas if you don't breathe into it, or you do something, or you pause and reflect, and again, breath or shake, you give yourself a bit of a shake, standing up, whatever it might be, then you're not shifting your mind to a different place. So kudos to you.
yeah, well, trying and learning every day.
Yeah,
um,
amen.
Though I wouldn't say this is my favorite question, because the next one would be, but this one is definitely one of my favorites. So, what challenges do companies face when trying to implement emotional intelligence into their cultures? And how do you help them overcome
Yeah,
this?
it's a really great question. So most times people perceive emotional intelligence as, in quotes, a soft skill, which isn't necessary. And it's often the thing where they think, they think that I know we'll do a half an hour workshop and then everyone will know what empathy and emotional intelligence is and they'll become more emotionally intelligent. Uh-uh. No, that's not how it works. So people, I think, have a tick box exercise in some organizations to want to complete this training to say that they've done it. But when you explain how the brain works, they'll see how impossible it is to get anywhere with it. So, what do I do to try and overcome that? Well, really, it does depend on the organization. So, if it's a sales organization, if it's an influential organization, and what I mean by that is here's a commercial entity, or here's maybe a charity who's trying to get behavioral change, you go to what their KPIs and their strategic objectives are. So, for sales, this would be perhaps getting a sale conversion faster because you are in check with your emotion and you are listening more carefully so you get the right product at the right time in front of the right people because you're exercising this thing. By the way, it's emotional intelligence. With charities, it's a similar type of thing, but this is about emotional connection very often. And if we talk about the rational versus the irrational or the less conscious mind, we know that 95% of decisions are made in a less conscious state. And yet, many charities often appeal to the conscious mind. So, again, in the case of charities, I would be talking about you want to get to that emotional connection. Let's do these things. Oh, and by the way, it's emotional intelligence.
I think we kind of covered what EI means in today's world. I think we touched on the different, obstacles or challenges, and how to overcome some of them. Um, but I think this is my favorite question. Being a very practical person, and a numbers person, so obviously, EI is paramount to the success of any organizations today. How do you measure the impact of it? I mean, what do you use? Is it very subjective, so it changes from one organization to the other, or there's like a very clear framework that you can just run through all of your clients?
So it depends which objective I've been brought in primarily to assist with. With employee experience, what you get as a result from the approach with employee experience is that they feel more valued, they feel better recognized, they get the feedback that's helpful to them, and there's overall a better relationship between colleagues and between colleagues and their leaders. So, what you find is an increase on the scoring of their annual or biannual employee survey, which shows an improvement because people are starting to, as I've said before, feel more significant, feel more heard, and they are also able to this is more longer term now. You see burnout start to decrease. You see grievances start to decrease. So when people start to like file complaints, you see all of those things come down over time because people are feeling that they are able better to manage their emotion, to understand what they're feeling, and as human beings that are all unique, it's that being present for each individual rather than you just being a number. So, from an employee point of view, it's satisfaction, it's relationship, it's how good my manager is, it's my well being. When we talk about customers, it's often about reducing complaints. It's about call handling times, interestingly, because you can get to a much clearer resolution when you're able to manage your emotions and draw out what's really going on for those customers. So these are very clear cut, very tangible results that organizations get. They bring me in for that stuff. But as I said before, sometimes it's labeled as a program as cost efficiency rather than this is emotional intelligence.
It reminds me, I was about 3 years ago, I was working for an American company, and we've been through a workshop to enhance employee experience within the company. And one of the questions that I remember still up until today that the majority of the employees couldn't answer was, how do I make the company money? Well,
Mm,
the answer might be easier when you work in sales and maybe in marketing or in customer success. But then what happens if you work for customer service? What happens when you work for customer experience? What happens when you work for, I don't know, IT or anything like that? That is not um, so clear on how do you make the company money. And when the company was, and I on purpose I'm touching this point, when the company was clear enough to the employees on how they help the company make money, it helped them to, feel more valuable in the
mm.
workplace. And that really, that one thing really changed the perspective of the entire workshop.
But what you've just touched on there is significance. The brain is constantly wanting to know what is this all about? What's my purpose? What am I meant to be doing? How am I actually adding value? So some work I do with some companies is what's called a line of sight. You more than likely you've heard of it, where you have the highest level objectives that filter through right to the staff that are at the front line. So they know that that thing they do, when they start stacking it up and stacking it up and stacking it up, if they didn't do that thing, this company would be out of business. The
Right.
brain needs it.
Totally. And I think for everything we do in business and life, um, and I want to kind of dedicate this last question to our leaders, listeners. Um, if you could give one piece of advice to leaders about incorporating emotional intelligence into their leadership style, what would it be?
Can I do two things?
Please, you can even do five. The more, the merrier. I'll
No,
tell you
no.
what. The more the merrier, because it's not the type of questions you type in Google or ChatGPT and you can get a clear answer, or you can get like a real key takeaway to help others on their journey.
Okay, so thank you. I am going to keep it to two because otherwise I could be here all day. The first thing is be conscious of your leadership style. And so I'm going to put my academic hat on for a second and I'm going to recommend that those leaders that are out there, please find the Goleman six leadership type model. There are six types of leadership. We're seeing two of them come up far, far more often these days, which is leading to your employees becoming burnt out. You should be using all six very differently for different types of people, for different scenarios. Be conscious of the leadership style you use and be intentional about the right thing for the right reason for the right people. The second thing is, and I've seen people do this and I've seen the transformation they've been on, just keep a journal. Every day for 2 minutes, write down what your intention is for the day. And then at the end of the day, if you've got time, maybe spend a minute, 30 seconds. What are you grateful for? Do that every day for 30 days, and I can promise you that you will become more approachable, more grounded, more authentic, more relatable. Because what you're doing is you're dealing with the first of four domains in the emotional intelligence model, according to Goleman, and that will help you understand how you're showing up, which emotions are causing you angst, those emotions that bring you joy, and you'll know what you need to manage better and what you should do more of.
Brilliant. And there you have it. Two stellar tips on how incorporating emotional intelligence into your leadership styles. Sandra, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. For our listeners, if you haven't yet did that, please check out the Emotional Intelligence podcast. It's also available on Podbean. Sandra, thank you again for joining us. It was a great pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me.